Although Future Sound of London's output between 2017 and 2022 was varied and incredibly busy, they didn't release a conventional studio album in the entire time. Indeed, the Environment series went on a hiatus for 5 years. And then in 2022, 2 volumes of Environment 7 were released. Typical. And it's the second we're going to be looking at today on Earthbeat Vision's A History of the Future Sound of London. The Future Sound of London, A Space of Partial Illumination, E7.02, release date 12th of October 2022. While the Environment 6 trilogy was released as 2 concurrent albums, and a third a few months later, not labelled as part of the trilogy, Environment 7 was announced as 3 albums up front and released spread apart. So questions were asked: when would the second volume come out? Would it follow weeks after Rituals? Months? The following year? First word came only a couple of weeks after Rituals, with the news that the album was complete and ready to be manufactured. At some point this got delayed. One assumes vinyl plant issues were to blame, as was extremely common in the first couple of years of the decade, and continues to happen from time to time. Original plans were for the album to be released pretty soon after the first part of the trilogy, with a 22nd July date given by Juno on the 28th of June. The tracklist provided was somewhat incomplete, listing the first 4 tracks and final 2 for reasons unknown. I'd assumed that this was probably side 1 of the LP, or that there were some very long tracks on there. This also announced the title, confirming that the trilogy would continue with the original title's theme, A Space of Partial Illumination, E7.02. Not 7.002 as expected, but then that in itself should probably have been expected. The page was then updated later in the same day, with the complete track list, but in completely the wrong order, and the cover. Then, and this is harking back to the good old days of the ISNIS, the release date got pushed back to the 29th of July, and on the 12th of July right back to October. On the 13th of July, Amazon announced a release date of the 18th of November. The album began to run away from us like a door in a dream at the end of a continually extending hallway. By mid-September, release dates were broadly agreed to be either the 14th or 21st of October. By early October, Amazon claimed it came out in July, and Saturn.d was stating 28th of October. Nowhere was offering it on CD at all at this point, just vinyl. It had been due on FSOLDigital at the end of September, but last-minute vinyl manufacturing delays had stopped that happening. This was by far the most confusing release date since the Mellow Hippo Disco Show, almost exactly 20 years prior. And eventually it appeared, in the middle of the afternoon on the 12th of October. The Bandcamp release named it E7.002, despite the cover simply stating E7.02, and the 4 CD and digital bonus tracks were announced, although they turned out not to be listed on the CD sleeve because, Christ knows why. Anyway, the album was out. The preview tracks on Bandcamp were for some reason chosen to be the 3 least representative of the whole record, to the extent that I saw a couple of people suggesting they weren't even going to bother with it because it sounded very stripped back and minimal. The main question for listeners was, how does this compare to Rituals? The 3 parts of Environment 6 had similar instrumentation and structures, but incredibly different tones and moods. Would this be the same? Given the surprising variety of Rituals, it was difficult to imagine how. Maybe it would feature the same kind of variety, but with a different atmosphere. Maybe it would be completely different. The truth is, a bit of all of them. On the whole, it's easy to hear that this was recorded at least somewhat similar time to Rituals. Indeed, all on the trilogy have a core of several tracks that were all recorded around the same time. Despite some strong differences, the overall feel is quite similar, on paper at least, with a mixture of the then familiar IDM sound, ISDN-style chunky beats, and a few other bits and bobs in between. It feels a lot cleaner, though. The title, A Space of Partial Illumination, is a definition of a penumbra, often exampled as the part of the sun seen through a partial eclipse. And that more sciencey, spacey sound, as a contrast to the earthier atmospheres as suggested by the title of Rituals, is evidenced here, so the thick rainforest vibes given by choking textures are all but gone, replaced by something airier, more spacious, more polished in places. With one exception, the mood doesn't jump around anywhere near as much as the previous album, with a broadly darker feel throughout. It also contains no shorter pieces or individual environments, with 5 tracks crossing the 5-minute mark. The more IDM leaning pieces feel even closer to Humanoid than they did on Rituals, with almost nothing in the 2016 to 21 style. One thing the albums do share is the darker vibe, in particular that helped by the choral sounding pads that run behind a lot of the tracks. It's more obviously melodic than Rituals, but not massively so, with several pieces still led by rhythms and backed by those textural pads. There are also pieces such as Embodied Cognition and All This Has Happened Before, which are very different to anything on 7.01. Overall, as opposed to the earthy feel of Rituals, this one is spacier. Maybe the most sci-fi feeling FSOL album since the 90s, since Accelerator maybe. The artwork. Yes, it's AI generated. The smudged, blurred style of the LP and digital covers is already incredibly dated after only a few years, with generative AI art having come on leaps and bounds since then. Don't know if it's even meant to be anything in particular, but the back cover is a similar style. The CD cover, unusually, is an entirely different image, oddly wobbly looking AI generated pipes. Beneath the CD, the image has been edited to include stripes. The booklet returns to the We Have Explosive 2021 mode of only being simple 4-page fold out. Inside is a further AI pipe image with Herd Killing logo on top. The credits to the right feature the Hexagon and Earthbeat logo. The back cover features the Earthbeat logo. No logos for the vinyl sleeve, although as with the CD includes an array of squares and lines that form a pleasing geometric display. The record labels feature the usual run of 5 symbols, while the CD has the catalogue number at a different angle to the rest of the text, which makes me want to tear my hair out. AI art is obviously a very contentious issue, and I don't really intend to incite a huge argument here. My general opinion is no thanks, especially at a time when it can't really produce something better than the human hand. Both covers here are a little underwhelming. FSOL art is usually beautifully photographic and impressive and epic, or analogue and retro. A smudge of colours or some wobbly pipes are just, I don't know, meh. Fonts though, now that's something exciting to talk about, right? The LP cover gives the band name as FSOL in Eurostyle extended bold, with the tracklist on the rear given in the non-bold version. The text on the labels, interestingly, is written in the same font as the labels and credits of Rituals. The CD front and back feature the band name in standard bold Eurostyle, not extended, while the CD features the extended form of the font. The tracklist features the font stretched vertically in a very strange way, and as previously mentioned, the 4 CD bonus tracks aren't mentioned anywhere in the disc or art. Interestingly, on both formats, the album title and manufacturing credits are in an entirely new font for FSOL, one not used on previous releases, a tall sans serif typeface. Quite neat, but much more formal looking than one would normally associate with any of the band's projects. This is used on the spine, breaking a pattern of FSOLDigital releases that, other than the Yage re-recording, goes back to 2016. For shame. On the other hand, the CD spine hasn't room for the E702, it's not included on the disc either, making it feel like the least related to the series to date and the most like just a standalone album. On release day, the album became the best-selling CD on the whole of Bandcamp, and by the following day, the 3rd best-selling release on any format on the site, and the best-selling electronic album. By this point, Amazon had changed their tune, and had the CD down as 25th of November. A few months after release, a rare review appeared on Headphone Commute. Admittedly, it doesn't say anything about the album at all, other than it's his favourite record since Lifeforms, but it's nice to see some coverage at least. There are FSOL releases I love, Lifeforms, Environments 2, those I like, ISDN, Accelerator, those I find underwhelming, Environments 3, the early archives, and those I just kind of struggle with, Controlled Vista, 2020 Calendar, and then there's a space of partial illumination. Upon release, I commented on the FSOL board that I immediately preferred it to Rituals, and I mentioned to Brian that it was my favourite release in quite a few years. Not that long after, my opinion had flipped, and it sunk to the bottom of my FSOL list, with me choosing not to listen to it at all for a year or so. To this day, I genuinely don't know how I feel about the album. Coming out in those first few months of having chronic illness, struggling with the pain all over my body and being bedbound, it wasn't time for me to necessarily be in the right mind to get to grips with it, but that aside, just don't quite know what to make of it. Don't think it forms the most convincing soundscape of the bands. I don't get an especially solid sound world from it, although re-listening to it today did give me a little bit more of a sci-fi kind of imagery with it. I think the reappearance of some previously released tracks on Mind Maps 2 is a disappointment, but if pressed to explain what it is I might dislike about it, I couldn't on a track-by-track basis. I think most of the stuff here is excellent, and occasionally a little safe, but there are a lot of brilliant tracks, some real surprises, and a tonal consistency that, for example, the previous album struggled with a bit. If there are just too few new moments in it, so that coming at the end of a 3-year period with 13 releases that are occupying at least broadly similar territory, I felt a little fatigued by FSOL. I think if it had come out in 2006 or 2014 or 2018, I would have been blown away by it, and perhaps it's my own cynicism, backed by some very critical and heavy-going discourse about the band and their music on FSOL board around the time, that soured me to what is quite clearly a very strong album. Interestingly, I've seen an incredibly broad range of responses to the record online, from people thinking it's among the worst FSOL albums to those who cite it as one of their finest. I do sometimes wonder if a bit of time away from being an FSOL nerd would do my enjoyment of their music some good, and maybe allow me to simply understand what I think about it. A space of partial illumination. Oh, a full-on actual Future Sound of London title track. When was the last time we had one of those? Was it Dead Cities? Space of Partial Illumination opens in very, very surprising territory. Not the opening 30-second field recording, although that is quite extensive and unusual, but the piece itself. Given the fairly dense sound of Rituals, one might expect something similar here. Instead we get a sound that's never really been heard on an FSOL track before, something resembling the clicks and cuts ambient style that was popular around the turn of the century. Although FSOL tends to operate out of the box, so this isn't built in quite the same way, the beats are nevertheless similar, quiet, minimal glitches of sound barely registering at all, playing stuttered rhythms behind the softest wisps of synthetic ambience, pillowy pads and general bleeps and bloops. It's possibly the calmest, most serene moment attached to the FSOL name, and a really remarkable album opener. It suggests that this is going to be quite a different album. Some slightly tenser sounds are thrown through some delays as a brief 90s sounding environment closing. If that were to occur, the remarkable difference in sound collapses quite quickly as the second track starts. The mid-tempo beats that characterise much of Rituals are back. Here though, they're less noisy, more crisp and forward in the mix. The textural elements remain in the background with what sounds like a vocal sample that's quite reminiscent to the one in Vertical Pig, that gives the piece a haunting vibe, suggestive of a labyrinthine empty space. The mood of these background textures is pitch black and lends the whole track an incredibly dark atmospheric vibe, despite being rhythm-led. Nocturnal insects and metallic bangs close the piece. Intense and purpose. While homogeny isn't something it's easy to accuse any FSOL album of, A Space of Partial Illumination is kind of the opposite. Heterogeny, fading in with further clangs, murmuring voices, we're in some kind of industrial or urban environment here maybe. Intense and Purpose is the first IDM piece of the album. The beats run fast and clicky, gradually morphing with layers and elements coming and going. Over the top, synths are part melodic, part percussive. The now familiar background pads are once again airy and distant, providing atmosphere more than tunefulness, while chirps and squeaks and squawks lead the way. For me, this is very much in the sci-fi mould, bringing to mind futuristic interiors and technology. The bleeps and bloops and glitches meld with the shimmering pads to suggest something surprisingly utopian at this point. Embodied Cognition. 4 for 4 on the heterogeny front with this piece of moody down-tempo music. Embodied Cognition leads with a very different sound, classical guitar, a nylon string arpeggio playing a mournful tune, over the top a very piano-esque synth, or maybe some actual filtered piano samples, add to the gloomy vibe with a simple but effective emotional melody. The beats mix drum machines with acoustic samples, making a surprising blend of the kind of down-tempo breakbeat one would maybe expect from an acoustic guitar-led instrumental with the IDM sound of this era of FSOL. The background is filled with squeaks and chirrups, field recordings, synths, both. They add an organic layer, while in the middle the piece briefly stops and we get a single vocal note that sounds like it might be from the intro to Dirty Shadows. A man murmurs something's wrong here over the field recording outro, suggesting things aren't quite as utopian as they may have seemed 5 minutes before. Long green field. And we're into modern classical territory with this Pemberton co-write. Continuing the vein of Ritual's track Ebb and Flow, this is far less of a straight-up piano composition with some synth in the background as a full-on ambient piece built around piano. The instrument has been fed through a number of machines and processes, and we're lulled back into a feeling of safety once more. Quiet, natural field recordings and synths act as a subtle closing environment. The beautiful track was first heard on the 5th Touch Music Night and later released on My Maps 2 before finding a more settled home on this album. Temporal aliasing. The first side of A Space of Partial Illumination ends with this piece, which, after a very long, tense build-up of dark electronics and synthy bubbles, reveals itself to be in a similar vein to, if that were to occur, programmed breakbeats over swimming synthetic atmospherics. The first time the album has recovered stylistic ground, and at this point it's actually much needed to try and keep the record rooted and consistent. The beats are faster than this kind of track has been for some time, while the synth pads air towards the choral once more, reminiscent of many tracks on Rituals. A plinky arpeggio brings the main part of the piece to a close before the track leads into the album's first lengthy environment, a 1.5-minute section of dramatic synth strings, gurgling noises and quiet field recordings, blending the man-made with the natural. In Solitude We Are Least Alone, Waltz. Keeping up the albums to and fro between uplifting and dark tracks, this reprise of the Environment 5 piece is what can only be described as an unexpected turn. It turned up on an NFT artwork in 2021, followed shortly afterwards by appearing on Touch Night 5 and Mind Maps 2. In some ways it fit all of those contexts. Here it feels weird. This is the first time a track has been repurposed outside of a connected album single campaign. It's very hard to work out how it all fits together. It's slightly louder and more brightly mixed than the rest of the record, which makes it stand out even more. Drums in 3/4 time, hence the waltz, and piano from the original appear, but in a more electronic context that pushes Raven Bush's violin to the very back of the mix, giving it a rigid, considerably less amorphous-y tone. The vocal performance that comes in the second half, and I have no idea if it includes words in a non-Western language or is wordless vocalising, are an unusual touch but very effective. Wonder who the singer here is. It's a nice take on the track, but yeah, I don't really understand its inclusion here. Frozen Light, back into more obviously sci-fi sounding territory again, albeit of the utopian variety, is Frozen Light. It began life as part of the Bug Beats library music track Enofa, which runs to about half the runtime of this full piece. It's unknown whether Robin Appleton and Will White contributed to this track. The downtempo beats are very similar to those found on Embodied Cognition, but instead of the brooding acoustics, the leads here are bright, optimistic analog synth arpeggios and the now very familiar choral pads. It's a simplistic but very effective piece and has scope for at least a couple more minutes of runtime. Informal Horizon. Like Intense Some Purposes, darker, bigger brother, Informal Horizon brings the mood back to clattering IDM once more, percussion-like strands of metal clanging against each other, growling background drones add tension and a feeling of being chased, while further synths once again prefer burbles, chirps and squeals of percussive noise, the sound of computers and mechanisms bleeping away, following malign orders. There's a heavy influence from recent humanoid material here, and it always reminds me of Locust's early work. Ephemeral opens on heavy reverberated church bells or something similar, keeping up the sinister vibe from the previous track. However, we gradually begin to hear tinkling piano, and it becomes clear that this is the second Pemberton collaboration of the album. Layers of quickly played ostinatos pile up, creating a waterfall of notes behind which a low brooding synth pulses. It's a refreshing piece, one of tonal ambiguity but textual clarity, the sound of showering off the darkness and dirt of the previous track and a moment's pause before continuing the journey. All this has happened before. Every fan review I've read and heard of this album has compared this track to Alice in Ultraland. Gaz's most obvious contribution to A Space of Partial Illumination, All This Has Happened Before is an utterly brilliant piece but strikingly amorphous in sound. If Hopiate is Cascade with a serotonin boost, this is the emptiness of nothingness on a downer. Dramatic piano chords, a steady, almost plodding live drum beat, what is probably a violin melody, reverse guitars, synth harpsichords, synth strings. The track runs through each section in turn, allowing each instrument to take the lead before moving on to the next, in the late 90s amorphous style. The difference here is the clarity. Instead of everything playing at once, a cacophony reminiscent of a band where everyone's trying to be the lead performer, there's a space running throughout the track, allowing everything room to breathe. A brief break in the middle features the field recording from the album's opening moments, while a percussive hit from Hallucination appears a couple of times. The closing environment features weird, unidentifiable sounds disappearing into an abyss. All This Has Happened Before is one of the most popular tracks on the album, and it's not hard to hear why. The epic melodicism that comes with many of Gaz's best pieces is here in spades, and while his presence on recent FSOL releases might feel reduced, this is a firm reminder of why he's as important as ever. How Forests Think. Unlike the other two parts of the Environment 7 trilogy, which have concise vinyl versions that don't necessarily need the CD bonus tracks, 7.2's LP version closes on How Forests Think, which is a very fucking weird and unsettling way of ending a record, which is quite FSOL in that regard, I suppose. The first piece on the album to feature the thick, heavily compressed mix that was all over Rituals is an IDM track, one where the beat never resolves into anything you can even nod your head to, a cacophony of rattling and clattering noises. Over this we get the usual array of atmospheric pads, percussive synth notes and growls, and a real sense of unease and uncertainty. Despite the track's title, this is not warm organic music. This forest is either completely artificial or has been genetically altered and has become sentient. Helicopter, 450 quid, says someone on an answer phone message, a sign of the Touch Music Mix albums bleeding over into mainline FSOL territory. Mangy Burger. Look, I'm sorry, but there shouldn't be an FSOL track called Mangy Burger. I don't care what justification you come up with, I don't care if Brian pops up into my inbox explaining the detailed story behind why this track is called Mangy Burger, it should not be called Mangy Burger. Look at the state of this. Frozen light, informal horizon, ephemeral. All this has happened before. How forests think, Mangy Burger. Also completely derails a sci-fi theme I'm building with this album. A scientific station somewhere with odd experiments going on inside and out, utopian white spaces clashing with dark undercurrents. I mean, it still sounds like that. It's actually a really odd piece in general, no obvious bass other than a few booms and clangs, a fast, muffled beat and bleeping synths almost suggestive of trance music, only a strange wispy shadow of trance, an imprint of a trance track left behind after it's been removed. It certainly doesn't sound like a Mangy Burger would sound. The second half is led by a lot of clattering, as if an entire shed is being slowly emptied over the piece. I love it when FSOL surprises me. I love really odd, totally different, yet successful tracks, and this is a great example. But seriously, Mangy fucking Burger. The Stationary Air Mass. An utterly superb track that makes the CD and digital editions of this album worth buying alone. Opening with a very long, slow build-up of synth textures over which a slow chugging beat finally fades, it feels like it might just poodle on with the same usual sounds, a few pads and synth growls being the focus over the hypnotic rhythm, but then the pensive mood is killed by some odd samples in very 90s style. The section from around 240 could easily have come from late 1994, and then we're suddenly into much brighter territory as rich, woozy synth chords come in, piano notes follow, and things are bursting forth towards the euphoric. A really surprising piece. Whatever a stationary air mass is, it turns out it might not be such a bad thing after all. Exists to remove doubt. The final piece on a space of partial illumination to have been heard on the pairing of Touch Music Night 5 and Mind Maps 2, Exists to Remove Doubt is the album's only concession to the bleepy IDM miniature approach much favoured over the previous few years. The crunchy nature of the beats and the wooziness of the synth led me to first describe this track as sounding like a cross between Autechre and Boards of Canada, and there's some merit to that. It's bright and uplifting, but a little over 2 minutes and developing very little over that time, it does feel incredibly slight to me, and is easily my least favourite on the album. Pleasant but unremarkable. Spoken samples close the track, asking to follow my voice. Sophie's Path, an ode to Brian's cat. Sophie's Path is a very dark track to close the album. 4 minutes of rich, thick analogue synths. It could almost pass as a synthy A track in sound. Incredibly melancholic, a mournful piece of longing and loss. It brings our science fiction journey to end on a downer. Something has definitely gone wrong here. On a more human note, the ode is a strikingly personal one. As pads and arpeggios fade to silence, we're left with the field recording that opened the album once more, bringing things full circle, making the CD and download editions the essential versions of the album, and leaving us to ponder the journey we've been on. And there, I've totally just talked myself into thinking this is an all-time classic FSOL album. Watch as I totally forget all of this and think I don't like the album very much in a week's time. FSOLDigital presents Mind Maps 3, release date 17th June 2022. Did anyone have any doubts that this would come along? First mentioned on the FSOL board on the 12th of May, announced by Touch Music on the 23rd, this basically cemented Mind Maps as an ongoing series. With the Mind Maps 2 launch night not featuring an exclusive mix, this was created specifically for release. Grid Pattern's design matches the previous two volumes, with green and red being the key shades this time. Again, the disc is presented as a single hour-long track with no digital version, but this time we do at least have something resembling a track list, or at least an artist list printed on the digipack foldout, even if it doesn't quite match the contents of the disc. Again, the only credits are all tracks remixed and decomposed by Yage at 90 West Studios, with the usual 5 logos accompanying the Touch Music logo on the back cover. A minute-long video promoting the album was added to YouTube and Facebook at the start of the release week. Copies went on sale from both Touch Music and FSOLDigital on the evening of the 17th, following the launch night on Mixler. As with the second volume, I feel this set gets stronger as it goes on, with more variety and some moodier pieces in the second half. That said, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a fan of the playful, childlike melodies, toytronic end of IDM, something I blame the Richard D. James album for, and never have been, so on the whole there are big chunks of this disc that just don't do anything for me. As these remixes are less radical than the mid-90s ones, which were effectively original FSOL tracks with a few samples from the given track, the original material effectively defines the sound here, and it's just not a sound I'm into. No shade on anybody involved, but Mind Maps 3 is one of my least listened to FSOL discs. But if it's your kind of thing, though, you will find a lot to love here. Heogen, a rectangular triangles Yage remix. The CD opens with answer phone messages, but of course it does, before hitting straight into this track, and we're straight into the expected style with Touch Music, with richly melodic, glossy IDM. This, as with all Heogen material, is a gorgeous tune, and its fast-paced and glitchy beats actually show very little Yage on the surface, but all the rhythmic aspects are created by Brian, with the original being half the speed and more Boards of Canada inspired in its beats. An answer phone message, probably from Boogie, talks about getting some photographs of the moon for the Lifeforms art. I still don't know. Untitled. The second track is the second piece by Ma, a collaborative project between Martin from Touch and Brian. And it sounds very much like you'd expect it to. Almost naively uplifting melodies, shiny IDM beat, you know the kind of thing by now. Reversed voices and answer phone messages close. Inky Pack, Open Door, Yage remix. This sound continues unabated with this Inky Pack remix, and by this point the artists on Mind Maps are almost entirely coming from within the Touch Music roster, bringing a uniformity to the style of the pieces. Again, here we get richly melodic, bouncy IDM with a turn of the century vibe. Sound of London, Untitled, or Unknown. The first FSOL track of the mix, and otherwise unreleased, making its title unknown for the moment, with layers of chunky breakbeats and thick analogue synth sequences. It's a touch rawer than the previous tracks, but largely fitting with the mood of the style of the disc. It breaks down to drums and pads for an atmospheric middle, before building up again to a fairly intense climax section. The drums fall apart into chopped up noise at the end, overlaid by answer phone messages, including one from Robert Fripp, whose car has broken down and wants to come and visit later in the week. Wow, who could say no to Robert Fripp? Sooty and Gorge, Rather Lazy, Yage remix. A track from Sooty and Gorge's then recently released album on Touch Music, and no, I'm not attempting that title, and one that continues with the slightly rougher sound with beats on the hip-hop end of IDM, opening with the steam train sound used so often on live forms. As the bass line begins to develop, however, things head into bouncier territory once again, with more playful toytronic melodies. A violent-sounding lo-fi field recording closes the track, followed by a voicemail asking if FSOL want to do something with Aphex on Monday. Aphex is up for it. What was this and why didn't it happen? Skirken, Oryctolagus cuniculus, Yage remix. This punchy piece is actually quite similar to the original, the remix being more of a rearrangement and polish than anything, with some fairly bonkers glitched up synth bits near the end. Creates a strange, hard to describe emotional feel somewhere between uplifting and unsettling. The track fades out to quiet breaks, violin, reversed sounds and various elements from the piece thrown through the FSOL blender before slowing down to noise, an environment of quiet voices, animal sounds, a stringed instrument being plucked and other odd noises. Enofa, Obscure Diagram, Yage remix. Oh look, it's me. The original is quite a sparse, minimal piece with the high-pitched tapping sound, actually my dad hammering a fence post in his garden, the only percussion, which has been sped up and given a high-speed IDM beat in this remix. The two are quite clearly versions of the same material, and yet incredibly different at the same time, with this being an energetic, bouncy, uplifting piece. There's a fun moment where the whole track stops for a bleep and it slows down for a few seconds in the middle. Angel Mark Lloyd's guitar is reversed to form the outro, accompanied by layers of answer phones. Miniland featuring Mellotron, Crash Over Me, Yage remix. Now there's something different, with Mellotron aka Nick Marsden and Pleasure Fields providing vocals. This fast, hectic IDM piece is a long way from usual Yage territory. The vocals add a very surprising touch to the CD. Otherwise it's the darkest sounding piece on My Map 3 so far, with a much gloomier, almost paranoid atmosphere beneath the manic drums. And then there are more answer phones. Do I even need to mention these anymore?
Waiting to crash over me. Waiting to crash over me. Waiting to crash over me.
The Future Sound of London, OPK Machines, Tricks M1. The second FSOL piece from the disc is officially unnamed, but is an alternative take of OBK Machines' Tricks M2 from the 22 calendar album. The M1 title is a fan creation, but one that works pretty well. It's a touch more chaotic than the calendar version. It closes on a long atmospheric environment of a gurgling stream overlaid with various guitar lines. Wind, water, fire, I am the daughter of elements. An unidentified spoken sample plays as things crossfade into the following track. Molejeek, unknown. Oh, what's this? A new alias. Plodding, bouncy, almost comical beats, more than a touch of a tribal sound, overlaid with flutes, drones, and plenty of weird, unidentified sounds, some sinister samples, the wind, water, fire sample from the end of the previous track, and a whole load of other stuff. Creepily sinister, not really like anything else, perhaps a touch of the woodlands of old in places. The closing environment pits thick drones against chaotic percussion, followed by a cacophony of organic noises and field recordings. Moshon Sensu, Whispered Concerns, decomposed by Yage. Taking a break from the manic beats that form most of the Mind Map series, this remix retains the original track's ambience, built around pianos and synth strings from that track, but overlaid with textural elements including field recordings, speech samples, synth noises, and various unidentified sounds, giving it the kind of collage feel one might normally associate more with 90s FSOL. This is a really stunning track, some deeply emotional work here, especially as the piano and strings reach a climax at the end. Humanoid, Atari Skodar. This opens with an answer phone message reassuring Brian and Gaz that everything is okay and they're moving from Virgin to Polygram who'll be okay with clearing samples. I'd fucking love to know the context of this. I don't recall anything of theirs coming out on Polygram. Atari Skodar is a gorgeous little humanoid track with a stuttering beat, some lonely sounding synths that are heavily evocative of Apex's early mellow tracks. Think 85 to 92 and the gentle acoustic window and classics tracks, with bouncy analogue sequencing over the top. There's a ton of space in the piece, often only a handful of smaller sounds playing at once, which gives it a very different sound to even the humanoid and FSOL productions from this era. A beautiful piece that isn't something I'd ever imagined coming from Humanoid. It later featured on Touched Music's Found Sound 3 compilation. A brief snippet of rotation acts as a crossfade into the closing environment, a brief nylon string guitar loop, bells, and an answer phone message from Jeremy. Quite a sinister little section. The future sound of London, unknown. Well, that's what's listed on Discogs anyway. This piece isn't listed on the sleeve at all, so it's hard to say what it is. It's drum machines to the fore, very clicky, quite reminiscent of some humanoid calendar pieces, so that will be my guess of alias, but as it is, who knows. Answer phone messages all over the top.
Is it coming down or not really? I've got a big box of records here down here. If you can't make it today, mate, no worries at all. Just give us a call and we'll just sort of arrange this maybe for the next couple of days. The only sort of time I'm not going to be about. It's Saturday really, so any sort of time is a leisure really, man. So speak to you soon, see you later, bye.
Hi, Future Sound of London, it's Danny.
Yage, unknown. Live funky bass, string samples, live drums, sitar notes. This is Yage very much in the Woodlands of Old mode rather than simply the default remix alias for touched releases. More than a touch of amorphous to this track, no less. It ended up appearing on Trip Maps Psychedelic Worlds the following year under the alias Slow Leak. As it fades out, Rob Manley informs the band they're the second best-selling single in the Virgin Megastore charts. What do we reckon that is? Lifeforms? Do we have explosive? Hyogen Rectangular Triangles Yage Old Remix, an alternate take of the opening track from the disc, this time featuring some more complex and fast beats but sparser arrangement overall, with piano notes leading the melody. My preferred of the two. Riz Maslin, The Lake of the Woods, Yage remix. Mind Maps 3 closes on a gentle note with this remix of Riz Maslin's beautiful ambient piece, The Lake of the Woods. Piano, always a favourite of FSOL, is placed at the fore with Maslin's vocals layered to create an almost choral backing. A really gorgeous way to end the CD. Flute, piano and ansophones close out the disc.
Garry, Brian, hi, it's George at Kiss 10 to 8 on Wednesday evening, the 20th of October. Give me a call tomorrow because if you can do it, we may as well give you a month-long worth of giving it up to run in about 2 weeks' time, starting 2 weeks tonight, Wednesday. If you think you can get things into the 3rd of November being the first one, if you think we can get things into gear for that time. If not, give me a call and we'll arrange it for January anyway, or February, we'll see what's suitable.
Touched Music Night 7, 17th June 2022. As was the norm at this point, the third Mind Maps album was launched with a broadcast on Mixler. This time there was no exclusive mix, simply a full play of the CD itself. However, 50 minutes of new music was also heard, making it a notable broadcast in itself. After the You Are Trespassing sample from Cocoon comes The Waste Ground, the first of a number of half-hour sound collages created as warm-ups to play while people arrived into the Mixler chat. These would be released several years down the line, and I'll get to a proper description when I cover Unrealities in a 2025 video. But in short, this is the most abstract of them all, largely a 30-minute drone with various samples played on top at different intervals. After the CD was played, text-to-speech using the female Indian setting revealed that Mind Maps 3 was now available to purchase and announcing a bonus 15-minute mix. This mix opens with Cut In, announced to be from Environment 7, but eventually turning up on multiple angle distortions a couple of years later. After a few seconds of earlier Environment style sounds, we get a 40-second long slice of 90s style down tempo music, much too short. It closes with the Repo Man samples from It's My Mind That Works, backed with vaguely theremin-esque synth melodies. This section is all very, very lush. The FSOL remix of Dan Pemberton's Workshop of Invention follows, closing with a voicemail from Max Richter, who isn't completely sure what day it is. After a short, dark environment of drones, sent to Humanoid's Troll, after another lengthy environment of drones, field recordings and phone messages, the mix closes on another track promised to be from Environment 7.3, a slightly hauntological piece of sprightly analog synth sequences. As with almost everything that was promised to be Environment 7.3, it remains unreleased to date. And that's your lot for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the music that I was talking about. Do drop me a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on A Space of Partial Illumination. A surprisingly contentious album that really seems to mix opinions. But yeah, drop me your thoughts on it down below. And of course, Mind Maps 3. Are you one of the IDM fans who really likes that? Press one of the buttons as well if you want to help promote my channel somehow. And I will be back next week with the third and final part of Environment 7, so I really hope you'll join me then. The first side of A Spatial of Spatial of Partial Illuminate. The final piece on A Spatial of Partial. I'd love to hear your thoughts on A Spatial of. And we're we're into modern classical territory with this Pemberton Den Pemberton. As with the norm at this point, the third Mixmax album... Yes, Mixmax 3. As was the norm at this point, the third Mind Maps album. Let's see what I'll get wrong the third time I try it. As was the norm at this point, the third Mind Maps album was launched with a broadcast on Mixler. Nothing, apparently.